We look at Antarctica and see a wasteland. Miles of useless ice, a frozen desert at the bottom of the world. But we are wrong. The ice isn't just a landscape, it's a lid. It is a miles-thick, heavy door specifically designed to keep something locked down. In 1947, the United States Navy launched Operation Highjump. Officially, it was a training exercise. They sent 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft to look for coal deposits. That was the lie. The truth, hidden in the classified flight logs of Admiral Byrd, is much simpler and much more terrifying. They didn't go there to explore. They went there to fight a war against something that has been waiting for the ice to melt. Welcome to the White Tomb. The world was still recovering from World War II, but in the Pentagon, a new panic was rising. Intelligence reports suggested that before the fall of Berlin, Nazi submarines had smuggled mysterious technology to the South Pole. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, a national hero, was tasked with investigating. But this wasn't a scientific team. It was an armada. You don't bring an aircraft carrier to study penguins. You bring it to Project Power. The fleet arrived in the Ross Sea in January. The men were confident. They had defeated the Axis powers. Surely they could handle some ice. They had no idea that their guns were useless against what lived in the hollow earth. The first thing you notice in Antarctica is the silence. It's heavy. It presses against your eardrums. The second thing is the scale. The Ross ice shelf is a wall of blue ice, 200 feet high, stretching forever. As the USS Mount Olympus broke through the pack ice, the compasses began to spin. Magnetic north means nothing here. The radio operators reported strange interference, a rhythmic clicking sound like a metronome coming from beneath the water. The sonar operators were even more disturbed. They weren't picking up the sea floor. According to their instruments, the ocean under the ice shelf didn't have a bottom. It just went down into a void. On February 19th, Admiral Byrd took off in a PBM Mariner for a reconnaissance flight over the interior. For 3 hours, they flew over the endless white plateau. But at 10:00 a.m., the impossible happened. The radio transmission from Byrd's plane was recorded. "There is land below me, not ice, land." Below them, in the middle of the frozen continent, was a massive geothermal oasis. The Bunga Hills. The ice had melted away, revealing bare brown earth, vibrantly colored lakes, and mist. The temperature gauge in the plane shot up from -60 to +40 degrees. They were flying over a heat source massive enough to melt a hole in the bottom of the world. Byrd ordered a landing. The seaplane touched down on a freshwater lake that shouldn't exist. The crew stepped out, weapons drawn. The air was warm, humid, and smelled of sulfur. It was a valley out of time. They found moss. They found tracks that looked like they belonged to large cats. But the most disturbing discovery was the silence. There were no birds, no wind, just a low-frequency hum that vibrated the fillings in their teeth. Captain Smith, the co-pilot, pointed to a ridge about a mile away. "Admiral," he whispered, "look at the geometry. The hills weren't natural. They were perfectly triangular. They weren't mountains. They were pyramids, covered in thousands of years of mud." They approached the structure. Standing 500 feet tall, it was blacker than night, made of a seamless material that felt like cold glass, but absorbed all light. It wasn't Egyptian. It wasn't Aztec. It was alien. Admiral Byrd touched the surface. It reacted. A pulse of blue light rippled through the black material, traveling up to the apex. The humming sound got louder. Suddenly, the radio screeched to life. But it wasn't the base calling, it was a voice speaking a language of clicks and whistles. The structure wasn't a tomb, it was a transmitter, and by touching it, they had just sent a ping to whatever was listening on the other end. The ambush didn't come from the land, it came from the sky, or rather, from the water. The lake they had landed on began to boil. 3 disc-shaped crafts rose silently from the depths. They had no wings, no propellers, and made no sound. They hovered effortlessly, defying gravity. The Nazi intelligence reports had mentioned Die Glock, the bell. But these weren't German. They moved with a fluidity that was organic. Admiral Byrd ordered his men back to the plane. "Do not fire unless fired upon," he yelled. But panic is a trigger-happy emotion. A young gunner on the PBM opened fire with a .50 caliber machine gun. The bullets hit the discs and dissolved. They didn't bounce off, they melted in mid-air. The retaliation was instant. One of the discs emitted a thin, red beam of light. It swept across the starboard wing of the seaplane. There was no explosion, no fire. The wing simply ceased to exist. It was vaporized at a molecular level. The plane listed into the water. "Abandon ship!" Byrd screamed. They inflated the life rafts as the discs hovered overhead, watching. They weren't attacking to kill, they were swatting a fly. The message was clear. You are primitive. Leave. But the discs didn't follow them to the shore. They returned to a formation around the Black Pyramid, as if protecting it. They were guards, but what were they guarding? They managed to radio for air support. 2 destroyers launched their Corsair fighters, but by the time the fighters arrived, the oasis was empty. The discs had vanished. Byrd was extracted, shaken and pale. He was flown back to the USS Philippine Sea. He immediately demanded a secure line to Washington. He told the president, "We are not alone down here, and they can fly from pole to pole in minutes." Operation Highjump was supposed to last 6 months. It was cancelled after 6 weeks. The fleet turned around and limped home. They claimed they had achieved their goals. But the casualty list told a different story. Dozens of men dead, several planes lost to weather. The official cover-up began before the ships even docked. But one man didn't come back empty-handed. Corporal James Miller, a mechanic, had picked up a fragment of the black material that had chipped off the pyramid during the firefight. He smuggled it on board the ship in his kit bag. He thought it was a souvenir. He didn't know it was a seed. That night, in the bunkroom of the USS Pine Island, the temperature dropped. Frost formed on the walls. Miller started dreaming. Not his own dreams, but the dreams of something else. He dreamt of a city under the ice, a city where the inhabitants weren't dead, just frozen. And they were waiting for a signal, the signal that Miller was unwittingly carrying right back to civilization. 70 years passed. The Antarctic Treaty forbade military activity, effectively quarantining the continent. But corporations don't follow treaties. Enter the Archimedes Group, a private tech conglomerate looking for rare earth minerals. In 2024, they launched the most advanced icebreaker ever built, the Polaris. Their destination wasn't the coal deposits. It was the coordinates found in Corporal Miller's diary, which had been sold at an auction. They weren't going to look for coal. They were going to dig up the pyramid. They had drills, lasers, and nuclear power. They thought they were prepared. But they forgot the first rule of the Arctic: the ice doesn't give up its dead easily. November 12, 2024. The Polaris reached the coordinates marked in the 1947 journals, but the crew was confused. There was no oasis here, no green valley, just a desolate expanse of ice. But this ice was different. It wasn't the brilliant white of the surrounding shelf, it was black, dark, translucent ice that looked like frozen oil. Dr. Aris, the lead geologist, took a sample. "It's not dirty," he noted in his log. "It's pure water, but the molecular structure is dense." It was as if the water had been compressed by immense pressure before freezing. They parked the ship and deployed the mobile drilling platform. They were standing directly on top of the lid. Within 24 hours, Camp Archimedes was operational. It didn't look like a research station, it looked like a military outpost. High-intensity floodlights pushed back the polar night. The centerpiece was the thermal lance, a massive industrial drill designed to melt through 3 miles of ice in days, not weeks. The crew worked in silence. The isolation was already affecting them. Several engineers reported hearing a humming sound coming from the ice, vibrating through their boots. It was the same hum Admiral Byrd had heard. The CEO of Archimedes, watching via satellite link, gave the order, "Initiate the burn." They weren't just drilling, they were knocking on the door. The thermal lance was activated. It hissed as it melted into the black ice. The first 1,000 feet were easy. But at 2,000 feet, the drill hit resistance. It wasn't rock. It was a layer of ice so cold, so dense, that it shattered the diamond-tipped heads. And then came the sound. As the drill ground against this barrier, a high-pitched shriek erupted from the borehole. It sounded like metal tearing, or perhaps like a whale singing in agony. The sound was so loud it cracked the glass on the bridge of the Polaris. "Stop the drill!" Dr. Aris yelled, but the machine was on autopilot. It pushed harder, determined to breach the seal. Suddenly, the resistance vanished. The drill head dropped 10 feet in a split second. They had punched through. A blast of pressurized air shot up the borehole, blowing the heavy equipment seal like a cork. The air that vented out wasn't toxic. It was stale. It had been trapped down there for millions of years. Dr. Aris sniffed the sample valve. "Ozone," he whispered, "and petrichor, the smell of rain on dry earth, in the middle of Antarctica." They lowered a camera down the shaft. The monitor flickered to life. It didn't show water. It showed a vast, cavernous space. And floating in the darkness, caught in the beam of a light, was a structure. The camera rotated, scanning the cavern walls. It wasn't a natural cave. The walls were lined with the same smooth black material Byrd had seen. But then, the camera caught something else. Embedded in the ice wall, frozen mid-stride, was a figure. It was humanoid, but the proportions were wrong. It stood at least 9 feet tall. It wore armor that looked like it was grown, not forged, iridescent and scaled. In its hand, it held a long, double-ended spear. It wasn't a fossil. It looked perfectly preserved. "Is it a statue?" someone asked. Dr. Aris zoomed in on the face. The eyes were open. They were violet, and they were looking directly at the camera lens. "Greed is a fast-acting poison. The order came down from corporate. Bring it up!" They ignored the warnings. They ignored the fact that this Sentinels was clearly guarding the entrance. They widened the borehole and sent down a cutting drone. Using precision lasers, they carved out a 10-ton block of ice containing the figure. As the winch hauled the block to the surface, the weather turned. The storm outside intensified into a whiteout hurricane. The wind howled like a chorus of voices. The crew on the deck felt a sense of overwhelming dread. They weren't recovering an artifact. They were inviting a wolf into the sheep pen. The block touched down on the deck of the Polaris with a heavy thud. Up close, the figure was even more imposing. The armor seemed to shift colors in the floodlights, oil-slick black to deep purple. The face was pale, almost translucent, with sharp, angular features. It didn't look peaceful. It looked frozen in a snarl of rage. Dr. Aris touched the ice. "It's vibrating," he said. The ice wasn't melting, even in the heated hangar bay. It was cold enough to burn skin. They moved the block into the ship's secure biolab. This was the first time in history a human had stood face to face with the architects of the pyramid. In the lab, the scans began. The X-rays revealed a physiology that defied biology textbooks. The subject had 2 hearts. Its bones were reinforced with a metallic lattice, likely a result of genetic engineering. "Carbon dating is inconclusive," Aris reported. "The isotope ratios are off." It's like this thing hasn't aged a day in 10,000 years. But the most disturbing reading came from the brain scan. In a corpse, the EEG should be a flat line. But the monitor showed a faint, rhythmic spike. Beep, beep, me. Extremely slow. 1 pulse every minute. It wasn't dead. It was in cryostasis, and by bringing it into the warmth, they were initiating the wake-up cycle. Dr. Aris wanted to stop. "We need to freeze it back down," he argued. "We don't know what viruses it carries." But the corporate rep overruled him. "Let it thaw." As the ice melted, the water pooled on the sterile white floor. It was black water, the same substance from the lake in 1947. The air in the lab grew heavy. The smell of ozone returned. The lights flickered. As the last layer of ice fell away from the Sentinel's face, the armor's color shifted from purple to a dull, throbbing red. The sensors picked up a massive spike in energy. The creature wasn't just waking up biologically, its suit was powering on. It was a weapon system coming online. At 02 hours, the subject took its first breath, a ragged, wet gasp that sounded like cracking ice. The chest expanded. The scientists backed away, knocking over trays of instruments. Dr. Aris leaned in, mesmerized by the horror. "Can you hear me?" he whispered. The Sentinel's head turned. Snap. Fast. Too fast. The eyelids flew open. The violet eyes were glowing now. It didn't speak. It let out a sonic pulse. A scream of pure sonic energy. The glass of the observation deck shattered. The lights exploded. In the darkness, the red glow of the armor was the only thing visible. The Sentinel was awake, and it was inside the ship. The sonic pulse knocked the entire medical team unconscious. But Dr. Aris, furthest from the blast, stayed awake just long enough to see the massacre begin. The Sentinel ripped the sensors off its chest. It moved with terrifying speed, not robotic, but fluid, like a predator. It grabbed a lab assistant who was trying to crawl to the door. With a casual flick of its wrist, it snapped the man's spine. It didn't act out of anger, it acted out of efficiency. To the Sentinel, the humans were just infestation, termites that had broken into the tomb. It began to clear the room, methodically crushing skulls and tossing bodies aside to reach its weapon. The ship's private security team, Black Watch, arrived within 60 seconds. They breached the lab doors, weapons raised. "Target acquired," the commander yelled. They opened fire with 5.56mm armor-piercing rounds. It was a waste of ammunition. As the bullets approached the Sentinel, the red glow of its armor flared. A kinetic field manifested, a hard light barrier. The bullets didn't bounce, they simply stopped in mid-air, their kinetic energy absorbed and converted into power for the suit. The lead bullets melted into slag and dropped to the floor. The Sentinel looked at the soldiers. It seemed almost bored. Then it raised its hand, and the absorbed energy was released in a shockwave of fire. The blast knocked the security team back. The Sentinel walked over the burning bodies and retrieved its weapon, the double-ended spear. As its gloved hand touched the shaft, the weapon hummed to life. 2 blades of pure, coherent plasma ignited at each end. Snap, hiss. The sentinel didn't bother with the keypad to open the blast door. It simply slashed the spear diagonally. The 3-inch thick naval steel parted like wet paper, the edges glowing white hot. It stepped through the molten hole and into the ship's corridors. It wasn't looking for an exit. It was looking for the bridge. It knew exactly where the ship was being controlled from. Dr. Aris was still alive, bleeding out on the lab floor. As the creature walked past him, his scientific obsession overrode his survival instinct. He reached out, grabbing the sentinel's ankle. "Wait!" he croaked. "We can learn from you!" The sentinel paused. It looked down at the small, broken human. There was no pity in those violet eyes. No curiosity. It lifted its heavy, armored boot and brought it down. Crunch. The greatest xenobiologist of the 21st century was reduced to a wet stain on the deck plates. The sentinel didn't even break stride. It continued its march toward the upper decks, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Panic spread through the Polaris. The general quarters alarm blared, but there was nowhere to go. You cannot escape a ship in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean. The CCTV footage from that night is the stuff of nightmares. The sentinel moved through the ship with knowledge of the layout. It tore through the bulkheads, bypassed the stairs by climbing the elevator shafts, and silenced anyone who crossed its path. It wasn't hunting for sport, it was clearing obstacles. Crew members locked themselves in their cabins. The sentinel ignored them. It had a specific destination. It was heading for the communications array on the top deck. It needed to make a phone call. To stop the resistance, the sentinel decided to blind its enemy. It found the main power junction on deck 4. With raw strength, it ripped the main conduits out of the wall. A shower of sparks rained down. The sentinel stood in the electricity, absorbing the voltage into its suit. The Polaris groaned as the engines died. The lights went out. The hum of the ventilation stopped. The ship was dead in the water. Now, the only light came from the red emergency strips and the violet glow of the creature's eyes hunting in the dark. Silence fell over the vessel, broken only by the heavy metallic footsteps echoing on the steel grates. Clang, clang, clang! On the bridge, Captain Weaver barricaded the heavy blast doors. He was armed with a flare gun and a service pistol. He watched the internal sensors die one by one. Deck 3, lost. Deck 2, lost. The target was moving up. Weaver grabbed the satellite radio, trying to send a distress signal to the US Navy. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Polaris. We have a biological breach. It's unstoppable." But the radio was dead. The creature had severed the connection. Suddenly, the floor beneath Weaver's feet began to get hot. Paint started to bubble. The sentinel wasn't coming through the door. It was melting its way through the floor. Weaver backed away as a glowing blue circle appeared on the deck plating. The metal hissed and dripped. With a crash, the circular cutout fell into the room below. The sentinel rose through the hole like a demon from hell. It stood on the bridge, towering over the crew. Weaver fired his pistol. Bang, bang, bang. The bullets sparked off the faceplate. The sentinel didn't even flinch. It backhanded Weaver across the room, sending him crashing into the radar console. It didn't finish him off. It turned its attention to the ship's external controls. It walked to the window, looking out at the black ice and the pyramid in the distance. The creature stepped out onto the observation deck. The Antarctic wind was blowing at 80 miles per hour, but the sentinel stood like a statue. It raised its spear towards the sky. The tip of the weapon opened up like a flower. A beam of intense violet light shot upward, piercing the storm clouds. It wasn't a laser, it was a data stream. It was sending a wake-up code. The beam hit the ionosphere and scattered, raining down invisible signals across the entire continent. On the bridge, the dying Captain Weaver watched the radar screen flicker back to life for one last second. The screen was filled with red dots, hundreds of them, appearing all over the ice shelf. The signal was received. A mile away, the Black Pyramid began to hum. The sound was so loud, it shattered the remaining windows on the ship. Then, the ice began to crack. Not just around the ship, but everywhere. Massive fissures opened up on the horizon. From deep within the cracks, blue lights began to toggle on, one by one, then 10 by 10, then thousands. The sentinel on the deck lowered its spear and watched. It had done its job. The watchmen were awake. The white tomb was opening, and the thing beneath the ice was finally ready to stretch its legs. Captain Weaver was dead. Dr. Aris was dead. The Polaris was now a tomb, floating in the Ross Sea, but one man was still moving. Lieutenant Cole, the ship's helicopter pilot, was sprinting for the aft hangar. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the sentinel one deck below him. Clang! 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 It was hunting the remaining survivors. Cole didn't look at the bodies of his friends. He focused on one thing: the Eurocopter EC-135 parked on the helipad. It was the only way off the ice. If he could get airborne, he could radio the McMurdo station. But he had to be fast. The ship was listing 10 degrees to port. It was sinking. Cole threw himself into the cockpit and slammed the door. His hands flew across the instrument panel. Battery on! Fuel pump on! Starter engage! The rotors began to turn, slowly at first. Whir! Outside the hangar, the blast door began to glow orange. A plasma blade sliced through the steel. The sentinel was here. Cole watched the door melt. Come on! Come on! He screamed at the gauges. The turbine whined to life. The door collapsed inward with a crash. The sentinel stepped into the hangar, its violet eyes locking onto the helicopter. It raised its spear, aiming a blast of energy. Cole yanked the collective stick up. The chopper lurched into the air just as the spot where he had been parked evaporated in a violet explosion. The storm outside was a Category 5 blizzard. The helicopter was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. Cole fought the controls, his knuckles white. Visibility was 0. He was flying on instruments alone. Below him, the Polaris was burning. The red firelight illuminated the black ice for a fleeting second before disappearing into the whiteout. Cole banked hard to the west, away from the pyramid. He radioed Mayday. Mayday! Mayday! This is Archimedes 1! The ship is lost. I repeat, the ship is lost. Hostiles are everywhere. There was no reply, just static. And then, beneath the static, that clicking sound again. The sky wasn't empty. They were up here with him. His radar warning receiver screamed, 2 bogeys! Fast! Cole looked out the port window. Hanging in the air, matching his speed perfectly, was a silver disc. It was identical to the ones Admiral Byrd reported in 1947. It had no exhaust, no control surfaces. It just existed there, defying physics. It didn't fire. It was escorting him, or herding him. Cole pushed the throttle to maximum power, diving toward the ice deck to break the lock. The helicopter screamed as it hit 150 knots. The discs turned effortlessly, staying right on his wingtips. They were toying with him. Then, suddenly, they peeled off and shot straight up into the stratosphere. Why? Cole looked down and he understood. They didn't need to kill him. They needed him to see what was happening below. Cole climbed to 2,000 feet to get above the snow. What he saw made him forget how to breathe. The Ross ice shelf wasn't just cracking, it was opening. For miles in every direction, the ice was shattering, and rising from the dark water beneath were towers, massive obsidian spires piercing the clouds. A city. A metropolis that had been submerged for eons was surfacing. It wasn't a ruin, it was pristine. Blue lights coursed through the streets like digital veins. This wasn't an outpost, this was a capital. The sleepers weren't just a few soldiers, there were millions of them, and the warming of the planet hadn't just melted the ice, it had unlocked their front door. From the center of the rising city, the Black Pyramid pulsed again. This time, it wasn't a signal, it was an EMP. A shockwave of blue ionization expanded outward at the speed of sound. It hit the helicopter. Every circuit board fried instantly. The night vision goggles died. The radio sparked and smoked. The turbine engine flamed out. Silence. The rotors slowed down. Woof, 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 woof. Cole was falling. He was falling toward the black city rising from the sea. He pulled the manual auto-rotation lever, trying to glide the brick of metal onto a patch of remaining ice. "Brace for impact," he screamed to himself. The ground rushed up to meet him. The impact was brutal. The skids caught a ridge of ice, flipping the helicopter onto its side. The main rotor blades shattered, sending shrapnel slicing through the fuselage. The cockpit crumpled. Cole was thrown forward against the harness, his head smashing into the side glass. Then, stillness. Just the sound of the wind and the hissing of cooling metal. Cole hung upside down, blood dripping from his forehead into his eyes. He groaned, fumbling for his seatbelt release. He had to get out. The fuel tanks were ruptured. He could smell the kerosene leaking. He kicked the shattered windshield out and crawled onto the freezing ice. Cole stumbled away from the wreck, clutching his broken ribs. The cold hit him like a physical blow, -60 degrees with wind chill. His flight suit was designed for cold, but not for this. He looked around. He was stranded on a large floe of ice, maybe a mile wide. But the landscape had changed. On either side of him, the black towers of the alien city loomed like skyscrapers, blocking the horizon. He was an ant walking through a graveyard of gods. He found a small cave formed by two colliding ice sheets and huddled inside, trying to conserve heat. He took out his survival recorder. It was analog tape. It still worked. He pressed record. "My name is Lieutenant David Cole. I am the last survivor of the Polaris Expedition. If you find this tape, run." From his vantage point, he watched the sky. It wasn't empty anymore. The city was launching its fleet. Thousands of the silver discs rose from the towers in perfect unison. They didn't hover. They formed up in a V formation and accelerated. But they didn't head into space. They turned north, towards South America, towards Australia, towards us. This wasn't an exploration, it was a reclamation. The things beneath the ice had woken up to find their house infested with humans. And now, the exterminators were on their way. "I'm getting cold now," Cole whispered into the microphone. "It's almost peaceful. The humming sound, it stopped. No, it hasn't stopped. It's inside my head." He looked at the horizon one last time. The sun was trying to rise, a pale, weak dawn. But the light wasn't coming from the sun. It was coming from the ships covering the sky. "They are beautiful," he muttered. His hand dropped. The tape recorder clicked off. The snow began to bury him. The white tomb had claimed its final victim. But for the rest of the world, the nightmare was just beginning. When Lieutenant Cole died, the world didn't know yet. The EMP blast from the pyramid didn't just down his helicopter. It created an electromagnetic dead zone over the entire southern hemisphere. Satellites went blind. GPS failed. In Sydney, Cape Town, and Santiago, the internet simply ceased to exist. Air traffic control screens went black. Planes flying over the Southern Ocean vanished from radar. For 3 hours, humanity was confused, blaming solar flares or cyber attacks. We were busy fighting each other, arguing over who broke the internet. We didn't look up. We didn't see the silent armada crossing the ocean at Mach 10, flying just below the cloud layer. The first confirmed sighting was in Ushuaia, Argentina, the southernmost city in the world. Locals call it El Fin del Mundo, the end of the world. At 6:00 p.m., dashcam footage captured the arrival. It wasn't an invasion fleet in the traditional sense. There were no explosions, just shadows, massive, triangular shadows that blocked out the Andes Mountains. They drifted over the city, silent as ghosts. The streetlights flickered and died. Cars rolled to a stop. The people of Ushuaia walked out into the snow looking up. They reported a feeling of immense pressure in their heads, like descending too deep underwater. Then the snow turned black. The terraforming had begun. The fleet didn't fire lasers. They dropped payload. But it wasn't bombs, it was rain. A thick, viscous black fluid began to fall from the ships. Analysis of the residue found later showed it was the same water found in the Antarctic lake. It was teeming with alien bacteria. When it touched the ground, the grass turned gray and crumbled to dust. When it touched human skin, it burned, not with heat, but with cold. It was a biological defoliant, designed to strip the planet of its native biosphere to make room for something else. The sleepers weren't here to conquer us. They were here to evict us. They were fumigating the house. By midnight, the fleet reached Santiago, Chile, a city of 7 million people. A news helicopter managed to stay airborne long enough to broadcast the event live. A mothership, a vessel 5 miles wide, descended through the clouds. It hovered over the Costanera Center Tower. It emitted a single, rhythmic pulse, thrum. The sound shattered windows for 20 blocks. Then, the city went dark. The power grid was drained instantly. No emergency generators kicked in. Batteries in phones, pacemakers, and cars were neutralized. 7 million people were plunged into the Stone Age in a single second. The only light came from the violet eyes of the ship scanning the streets below. The world's air forces scrambled interceptors. Brazil and Argentina launched their fleets. The United States deployed carrier groups from the Pacific. It was a valiant, futile effort. Pilot reports described the enemy ships as having kinetic immunity. Missiles fired at them didn't detonate, they simply dissolved into blue dust. The alien vessels didn't even bother to maneuver, they just flew through the formations. The turbulence of their wake was enough to snap the wings off the fighter jets. We were throwing rocks at a hurricane. By dawn, the Southern Hemisphere's air defense network had effectively ceased to exist. The sky belonged to them. As news of the Santiago blackout spread, panic set in. The Great Migration began. Millions of people in the Southern Hemisphere packed what they could and headed north, away from the encroaching darkness. Borders collapsed. Governments declared martial law, but there was no one left to enforce it. The police were running too. The stock markets crashed to zero in minutes. Money became worthless. The new currency was gas, water, and ammunition. Religious cults gathered on rooftops, welcoming the angels of the apocalypse. Scientists realized too late that the alien flight path wasn't random. They were following the magnetic ley lines of the Earth. They were targeting the energy centers. We thought the threat was only from the sky. We forgot about the ocean. The Sentinel City in Antarctica wasn't the only outpost. It was just the capital. Off the coast of Sydney, Rio, and Cape Town, the ocean began to boil. Massive terraforming machines, dormant for millennia, rose from the continental shelves. These weren't ships, they were processors. They began to suck in billions of gallons of seawater, filtering it and pumping out the black sludge. They were changing the chemical composition of our oceans, turning them into a habitat suitable for the sleepers. The coastal cities weren't attacked, they were simply buried under tsunamis of black sludge. At 12:00 p.m. GMT, every screen on Earth was hijacked, from the digital billboards in Times Square to the smartphone in your pocket. The image was simple, the Black Pyramid. And with it came a sound. Not a voice speaking English or Chinese, but a psionic broadcast that bypassed the ears and went straight to the mind. Everyone heard the same message in their own language. It wasn't a declaration of war, it was an eviction notice. The cycle is complete. The ice is gone. Return to the soil. It meant that humanity was considered a temporary infestation that had occurred during their hibernation. Now that winter was over, the homeowners were back. They thought their concrete walls and air filtration systems would save them. They were wrong. The Archimedes group had unwittingly unleashed a force that could manipulate matter. The black rain seeped through the ground, eating through concrete like acid. It dripped into the ventilation shafts of the bunkers. Security cameras captured the billionaires, suffocating in their safe rooms, realizing that their money couldn't buy a seat on the lifeboat. There was no lifeboat. The planet itself was the trap. The only people who survived the initial wave were those living in the high mountains above the black fog line. What you have just seen is a reconstruction based on the recovered logs of the Polaris and the fragmented data from the last satellites. Of course, this hasn't happened yet. Or has it? The Polaris expedition is scheduled for next year. The ice in Antarctica is melting at a record rate. The cracks are forming. And the humming sound Admiral Byrd heard in 1947. It's being recorded again by sensors today. The story I just told you isn't history, it's a prediction. Now, let's look at the science behind why this scenario is terrifyingly possible. You might be telling yourself, that was a fun sci-fi movie. But before you click away, ask yourself one question. Why is Antarctica the only place on Earth where civilians are banned from exploring freely? The story of the Polaris is fiction, but the story of the Black Pyramid, that part is based on leaked coordinates. The story of the sleepers? That comes from the deathbed confession of a Navy flight engineer. For the next 40 minutes, we are going to look at the hard evidence. We are going to look at the photos NASA censored, the flight logs that were redacted, and the reason why John Kerry made a secret trip to the South Pole on Election Day in 2016. Let's go back to 1947. Admiral Byrd wasn't a crackpot, he was the most decorated explorer in American history. Yet, after Operation Highjump, his flight logs were classified top secret. Years later, a secret diaries, allegedly written by Byrd, surfaced. In it, he describes flying into a hole at the pole and entering a lush, green land. Critics call it a forgery. But if it's fake, why did Byrd tell a reporter in Chile that it is necessary for the USA to take defensive measures against enemy airfighters which come from the polar regions? He wasn't talking about the Soviets. He was talking about aircraft that could fly from pole to pole with incredible speed. Who was he afraid of? Operation Highjump was equipped for an invasion, not an excursion. They brought 4,700 troops, and they came back limping. The official Navy report lists a few accidents, a plane crash in a blizzard, a sailor falling overboard. But look at the destroyer, USS Murdoch. There are reports that it returned to port with massive circular holes burned into its hull. Not jagged tears from ice, but smooth, cauterized holes. The crew members were silenced. Some were institutionalized. What kind of weather burns a perfect circle through 3 inches of steel? The math doesn't add up. They retreated 6 months early. An army doesn't run away from ice. It runs away from an enemy. Try to book a flight over the South Pole. You can't. Pilots will tell you it's because of the cold fuel or lack of emergency airports. That is a half-truth. There is a specific sector known as the Zone of Silence, where even military satellites go offline. In 2002, a TV crew from California tried to charter a plane to film a documentary about the holes in the ice. Their permit was denied by the National Science Foundation. When they tried to fly anyway, they were intercepted by military jets and forced to land in New Zealand. If there is nothing down there but penguins and snow, why is it guarded like Area 51? Open Google Earth right now. Go to the coordinates 66 Re33 Seth, south, 99 Gaseftes east. You will see something strange, a massive, low-resolution white patch. The surrounding ice is crisp and high definition, but this specific mountain range is blurred out. It looks like a copy-paste error. Hackers have claimed that the raw satellite data for this region is blacklisted on the servers. Why? Because underneath that blur lies an opening. In 2012, a whistleblower released a raw image of that exact spot before it was scrubbed. It didn't show a mountain. It showed a massive, disc-shaped object, 60 meters wide, half buried in a cave. They aren't hiding the snow. They are hiding the crash site. We don't need eyes to see what's down there. We have thermal imaging. In 2018, NASA satellites detected a massive heat source under the Admiral Byrd land ice sheet. Scientists said it was a mantle plume, a volcano, but the heat isn't consistent. It pulses. It follows a rhythmic cycle, almost like a heartbeat or a generator powering up. This heat source is melting the ice from below, creating vast underground lakes and rivers. It's a perfect environment for life. If you wanted to hide a city, you wouldn't build it on the surface. You would build it in these warm geothermal pockets, shield it from the satellites by 2 miles of frozen water. The most compelling testimony comes from a retired Navy SEAL known only as Spartan 1. In an interview with investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe, he described a mission in 2003. His team was tasked with extracting a scientist from an underground structure in Antarctica. He described walking through a massive octagon-shaped door made of black basalt. Inside, the temperature was 70 degrees. The walls were lined with hieroglyphs that glowed green. He wasn't describing a cave. He was describing a facility. He claimed they found humanoids in stasis pods. When he asked his commanding officer what they were, he was told, "They aren't aliens, son. They are the ones who were here before us." Nature does not make straight lines. It makes curves, fractals, and chaos. But in Antarctica, we find geometry. Look at this satellite image from the Beardmore Glacier region. That is a perfect octagon. Each side is exactly 2 miles long. It's too symmetrical to be a rock formation. And it's not the only one. There are pyramids, 3 of them aligned exactly like the stars of Orion's belt, just like the pyramids of Giza. Is it a coincidence that the same layout appears in Egypt, Mexico, and Antarctica? Or were these civilizations connected by a precursor race? A race that decided to freeze their capital when the Ice Age began? Lake Vostok is the largest subglacial lake in Antarctica. It has been sealed off from the world for 15 million years. But the Russians who drilled there found something odd. In the early 2000s, their magnetometers picked up a massive magnetic anomaly at the south end of the lake. It spans 65 miles. It's a distinct metallic signature. Scientists shrugged it off as a concentration of minerals. But minerals don't generate a focused magnetic field strong enough to jam aircraft navigation systems. Some theorists believe it's a crashed mothership. Others believe it's a city. Whatever it is, the Russians stopped drilling right before they hit it. Did they run out of money, or were they told to stop? In 1959, at the height of the Cold War, 12 nations came together to sign the Antarctic Treaty. The USA and the Soviet Union couldn't agree on anything except this. They agreed to demilitarize the continent and ban all nuclear testing. Why? Why would two superpowers, hungry for resources and strategic bases, suddenly decide to hold hands and sing Kumbaya over a block of ice? Unless the treaty wasn't about peace. Unless it was a quarantine. They weren't protecting the penguins from nuclear bombs. They were making sure no one accidentally woke up the landlord with a nuclear test. It's the only treaty in history that has never been violated. We don't have to imagine monsters. We're already digging them up. In 2004, scientists revived a pithovirus from the Siberian permafrost. It had been asleep for 30,000 years. As soon as it thawed, it became infectious. And that was just from the surface. In Antarctica, we are drilling miles deep. The ice cores brought up from Lake Vostok contain bacteria that are alien to our biosphere. They thrive in darkness and extreme pressure. If the black rain in our story seemed far-fetched, consider this. The ice holds the biological history of the planet. And by melting it, we aren't just raising the sea levels, we are releasing the immune system of a previous epoch. An immune system that might view us as a virus. How did a tropical civilization end up under 2 miles of ice? The answer lies in the stomach of a mammoth. Explorers have found frozen mammoths in Siberia with undigested buttercups in their mouths. Buttercups are tropical flowers. This means the animal didn't die of hunger in a slow ice age. It was flash frozen. 1 minute it was grazing in a warm meadow, the next minute the temperature dropped to minus 150 degrees. This happens during a crustal displacement, where the Earth's outer skin slips over the core. If Antarctica was once at the equator, a slip like this would move it to the South Pole in a matter of hours. The city wasn't buried slowly, it was snap-frozen, preserving everything and everyone inside. In 1929, historians found a map drawn by the Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis in 1513. It depicts the coast of South America and Africa with amazing accuracy. But look at the bottom. It shows a landmass connected to South America. It shows rivers, mountains, and valleys. That landmass is Antarctica. But here is the problem. In 1530, Antarctica hadn't been discovered yet. And more importantly, it shows the coastline without ice. The US Air Force analyzed the map in the 1960s and confirmed that it matches the subglacial topography we found with seismic radar. Piri Reis said he copied it from older source maps. Who mapped Antarctica when it was green? Who was flying high enough to see the rivers? It wasn't just Piri Reis. The Orontius Phineas map of 5031 shows the entire continent of Antarctica with ice-free mountain ranges and flowing rivers. It accurately places the Ross Sea, where our story took place, as a bay flowing into the interior. Conventional history tells us Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years. But these maps suggest that as recently as 6,000 years ago, it was habitable. If the ice is a recent addition, then the ruins beneath it aren't millions of years old. They are part of human history. Or perhaps the history of a civilization that lived alongside us, ruled us, and then vanished when the cold came. We call them the Watchers or the Pre-Adamites. In Peru, just across the ocean from Antarctica, we find the Paracas skulls. These aren't cases of head binding. The cranial volume is 25% larger than a human's. They have 2 parietal plates instead of 1. DNA testing shows mutations unknown to any primate. Were these the refugees who escaped the freeze? If you look at the reconstruction of their faces, tall, pale, large eyes, they look exactly like the sentinel described in the Polaris logs. Maybe they didn't come from space. Maybe they came from down south. And maybe they are simply waiting for the planet to warm up so they can reclaim their territory. Geologists talk about the Younger Dryas impact, a cataclysm that wiped out the megafauna 12,000 years ago. It seems these events are cyclical. Every 12,000 years, the magnetic poles flip, the sun sneezes, and the crust slips. We are exactly due for the next cycle. The rapid melting of the ice caps isn't just man-made global warming, it might be the precursor to the next flip. The ancients knew this. The Mayans, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, they all warned of a great year that ends in fire and water. If the ice in Antarctica melts, it doesn't just raise the sea level, it releases the weight that is holding the crust in place. It unlocks the cage. Science is beginning to accept the idea of a shadow biosphere, microbial life that exists on Earth but has a completely different biochemistry, maybe silicon-based instead of carbon-based. If the entities in the Black City are silicon-based, they wouldn't need to breathe oxygen. They wouldn't freeze. They could survive in stasis for eons, powered by the Earth's magnetic field. This explains why the Sentinel absorbed the electricity from the ship. To them, radiation isn't deadly, it's food. We are carbon-based life forms living on top of a silicon-based graveyard, and we just plug them back into the charger. Nikola Tesla believed the Earth was a conductor. He built Wardenclyffe Tower to transmit wireless energy. He claimed he received signals from another planet. Maybe he wasn't listening to Mars. Maybe he was intercepting the standby signal from the South Pole. Engineers have long suspected that the Great Pyramid of Giza wasn't a tomb, but a power plant. If there is a matching pyramid in Antarctica, they could be nodes in a global grid, a wireless energy system that powered the ancient world. By drilling into the ice, the Archimedes group didn't just find a building, they completed the circuit. They turned the main switch back on. And the surge is what we are feeling now as extreme weather. We are poking the bear. Projects like HARP pump billions of watts of radio waves into the ionosphere. Officially, it's for communications research. But look at the focal point. These waves can be bounced off the atmosphere to heat up specific parts of the globe, like the ice sheets. Are we trying to melt the ice on purpose? Are the world governments trying to excavate the technology before the next cataclysm hits? It's a race against time. They want the weapons of the old gods to fight the coming war, but in doing so, they might be triggering the very apocalypse they are trying to prevent. So, we have the maps, we have the physics, we have the biological precedent. The pieces of the puzzle are all there. The story of the Polaris might be a dramatization, but the stage it is set on is very real. The ice is melting, the magnetic poles are shifting, and the silence from the south is getting louder. We are not the first advanced civilization on this planet. And if we aren't careful, we won't be the last. The tenants are waking up, and they are going to want their world back. Have you heard the booms? Since 2020, there has been a massive spike in skyquakes reported globally. From Texas to Bangalore, people report hearing loud, metallic grinding sounds coming from the sky. Scientists explain it away as atmospheric ducts or sonic booms from secret aircraft. But the sound isn't coming from above. Seismologists have confirmed that in many cases, the vibration starts in the mantle. It sounds like heavy machinery moving deep underground, or perhaps it sounds like massive doors grinding open. Doors that have been rusted shut for 12,000 years are finally forcing their way open. In Antarctica, we built the Ice Cube Observatory to detect neutrinos, ghost particles from space. But recently, Ice Cube detected something impossible. It detected a stream of high-energy neutrinos coming up out of the Earth. Physics says this shouldn't happen. Neutrinos pass through the Earth, but they shouldn't be generated by the Earth at these energy levels, unless there is a particle accelerator running down there. A machine powerful enough to mimic a star. The scientists are baffled, but we know the truth. The power plant in the Black City has just been turned on, and it's venting its exhaust through the crust. Follow the money. Why are the world's richest men suddenly building massive underground bunkers? Mark Zuckerberg is building a 100 million compound in Hawaii with its own food and energy supply. Jeff Bezos is hollowing out a mountain in Texas. The elite are preparing for something. They claim it's for privacies or nuclear war. But you don't build a self-sustaining underground city just for privacy. They have access to data that we don't. They know the cycle is ending. They know the treaty is about to expire. They are trying to hide. But as we saw in our simulation, when the black rain comes, concrete won't save them. In 2016, legendary astronaut Buzz Aldrin visited Antarctica. He was 86 years old. Suddenly, he was medically evacuated. While he was being airlifted, a tweet allegedly appeared on his official account. It showed a photo of a pyramid in the ice with the caption, "We are all in danger. It is pure evil." The tweet was deleted minutes later. Officials claimed he had fluid in his lungs, but conspiracy theorists believe he saw something he wasn't supposed to. Did the man who walked on the moon recognize the same architecture he saw up there, down here? They call the Thwaites Glacier the Doomsday Glacier. It holds back enough ice to raise global sea levels by 10 feet, and it is collapsing from the bottom up. Warm water is eating it from underneath. Scientists say it's climate change. But remember the heat signature? The melting isn't just atmospheric, it's geothermal. The heat from the awakened city is melting the ceiling. When Thwaites collapses, it won't just flood Miami and New York. It will unveil the entrance. The ocean is being pulled back to clear the stage for the main event. The Fermi paradox asks, if the universe is full of life, where is everybody? Why haven't we seen aliens? The answer might be the Great Filter. Maybe civilizations don't travel through space. Maybe they hibernate. Maybe Earth isn't our planet. Maybe we are just the weeds that grew in the garden while the gardeners were asleep. And now, the gardeners are waking up to trim the hedges. We aren't looking for first contact. We are facing an eviction. The Great Filter isn't ahead of us. It's beneath us. This is not an isolated incident. If you've been following our files, you know the pattern. File 01, Blackwood Asylum. The fire was started by twins drawing a spiral. File 02, Sentinel Rock. The lighthouse keeper found a spiral carved in the ocean floor. File 03, the Black Creek Mine. The red veins formed a spiral network. And now File 04, the White Tomb. The city is laid out in a spiral. These aren't random monsters, they are organs of a single planetary entity. The asylum was the mind, the lighthouse was the eye, the mine was the blood. And Antarctica? Antarctica is the brain. In 2017, an object named Oumuamua passed through our solar system. It was cigar-shaped, tumbling, and accelerated on its own. Scientists said it was a rock, but Harvard professor Avi Loeb suggested it was artificial. What if Oumuamua wasn't just passing by? What if it was a scout, a wake-up call sent from the stars to the sleepers in Antarctica? It passed Earth, sent a signal, and left. And exactly 1 year later, the seismic activity in Antarctica spiked by 400%. The alarm clock went off, and we are still hitting the snooze button. We like to think we are the apex predators. We split the atom, we went to the moon. But in the grand time scale of the Earth, we have been here for a blink of an eye. The civilization under the ice has been here for millions of years. To them, we are nothing more than mold growing on their ceiling. We aren't special, we are just in the way. The tragedy of the human race is that we spend so much time looking for gods in the sky that we didn't notice the demons beneath our feet. And now, the floor is getting warm. So, what can you do? Truthfully, not much. If the ice melts and the fleet launches, civilization ends in hours. But you can be aware, watch the south. If you see the internet go down in the southern hemisphere, run north. If you hear the sky grinding, get underground. And if you see black rain, do not touch it. The white tomb is cracking open. The story of the Polaris hasn't happened yet, but the clock is ticking. We are living on borrowed time, and the landlord is coming to collect the rent. We have now exposed the 4 pillars of the hidden world: the fire, the water, the earth, and the ice. They are all awake. If you want to survive the coming shift, make sure you have archived these files. Subscribe to the channel. Share this warning. The algorithm tries to hide these videos. You are the resistance. Until next time, keep your eyes open and never trust the silence.